Wake Forest University Custodial Training.
Slips, trips, and falls are one of the most frequently reported injuries at the workplace. Most of these can be prevented by following some basic awareness and housekeeping. Keep your work areas and all hallways and floors in clean, orderly, and sanitary conditions. Keep floors clean and dry. In addition to being a trip hazard, continually wet surfaces promote the growth of mold and bacteria that can cause infections. Keep aisles and passageways clear and in good repair with no obstructions that could create a hazard. Provide warning signs for wet floors, and keep exits free from obstruction. Access to exits must remain clear at all times. Falls and falling objects can result from unstable working surfaces, ladders that are not safely positioned, and misuse of fall protection. Workers are also subject to falls or to the dangers of falling objects if sides and edges, floor holes, and wall openings are not protected. Anytime a worker is at a height 4 feet or more, the worker must be protected. You risk falling if portable ladders are not safely positioned each time they are used. Position portable ladders so that side rails extend at least 3 feet above the landing. And make sure that the weight on the ladder will not cause it to slip off its support. Don't apply more weight on the ladder than it is designed to support. Before each use, inspect ladders for cracked, broken, or defective parts. When placing your portable ladder, be sure you are on a flat, even surface. For every 4 feet in height, the bottom of the ladder must extend from the base by 1 foot. Any ratio greater or less than this will increase the likelihood of the ladder becoming unstable and causing a fall. In order to ensure chemical safety in the workplace, information about the identities and hazards of the chemicals must be available and understandable to workers. OSHA's Hazard Communication Standard requires the development and dissemination of such information. As part of this plan, you should know what chemicals are present in the work area. Ask your supervisor what and where chemicals are stored in the work area. An overall campus inventory is maintained online. Ask to see the inventory before you begin. Read and understand the safety data sheet. Prior to using a chemical, be sure to read and understand the information in the Safety Data Sheet, or SDS. An online SDS database is available on the EHS website. And take proper precautions to protect against exposure. Be sure to wear the proper personal protective equipment, or PPE, when using a chemical. The SDS will designate the type to be worn. The safety data sheet is the primary source of detailed information for chemical products. Chemical names and properties, hazard identification, first aid and firefighting measures, spill control, and personal protection are all included in the SDS. Always read the SDS prior to using a chemical for the first time. The EHS website has access to an online safety data sheet system. All chemicals on campus are included in the database. Search by chemical name, product, or manufacturer. Physical and health hazards of chemicals. Explosive compounds include explosive substances, self-reactive substances, and organic peroxides. Flammables include flammable liquids, which are liquids with a flash point of not more than 200 degrees Fahrenheit, self-reactive substances, pyrophorics, which are liquids or solids which are capable of igniting in air, and self-heating substances, which are solids or liquids other than pyrophorics, which by reaction with air and without energy can self-heat. Oxidizers include general oxidizers and organic peroxides, both of which contribute oxygen to a fire. Gases are classified according to their physical state when packaged into one of 4 groups: compressed gases, liquefied gases, refrigerated liquefied gases, and dissolved gases. A chemical with acute toxicity is an adverse effect resulting from a single exposure to the chemical or multiple exposures over a short period of time, less than 24 hours. An acute toxicity tests in animals use mortality as the main endpoint in order to derive a lethal dose 50 or lethal concentration LC50. Sensitizers include acute toxicity, skin irritation, which is the production of reversible damage to the skin following application of a substance for up to 4 hours, eye irritation, which produces changes to the eye following an exposure and can last up to 21 days, but is typically reversible, and skin sensitizers, which is a substance that will induce an allergic reaction following skin contact. Chemicals identified as health hazards may be carcinogens, respiratory sensitizers, reproductive toxins, target organ toxins, or mutagens. Corrosives are chemicals that may cause eye corrosion, skin corrosion, or are corrosive to metal. Proper handling and storage of chemicals is essential for safety of yourself and others. Labels. All containers must display an appropriate label for identification. Storage. When not in use, all chemicals must be closed and stored in a safe and secure manner. Incompatibles. Never store incompatible materials together. Separate them by distance. Ignition source. Make sure to keep any ignition source away from chemical storage areas. Avoiding chemical exposure often requires the use of personal protective equipment, or PPE. Read Section 8 of the Safety Data Sheet for information on appropriate PPE to be used when working with chemicals. Make sure the PPE is appropriate for the hazard. Use goggles if there is a chance for splashing of a chemical, and make sure disposable gloves are in good condition and appropriate for the chemical in use. Label requirements. All labels must have a product identifier, which is the chemical name or product name, and that must match the one listed on the safety data sheet. The signal word, which is used to indicate the relative level of severity of the hazard. The signal words used are danger and warning. A hazard statement, which is a phrase assigned to a hazard class and category that describes the nature of the hazards of the product, including, where appropriate, the degree of the hazard. And a pictogram, which is the graphical composition that includes a symbol and other elements such as a border and background that's intended to convey a specific information. And lastly, supplier identification, the name and address and telephone number of the manufacturer or supplier of the substance or mixture needs to be provided on the label. Collection and disposal. Hazardous and other chemical waste may not be disposed in general trash or poured down sinks or storm drains. These wastes must be collected in dedicated containers that are properly marked. Bloodborne pathogen exposure control. Employees incur risk each time they are exposed to blood or other potentially infectious materials. Any exposure incident may result in infection and subsequent illness. Considering the possibility of becoming infected from a single exposure incident, exposure incidents must be prevented whenever possible. The goal of the bloodborne pathogen standard is to reduce the significant risk of infection. The objectives of the exposure control plan are to know the regulations that govern exposure control, understand the modes of transmission and other potentially infectious materials, ways to protect the worker from exposure to bloodborne pathogens and other potentially infectious material, including types of personal protective equipment, and how to handle a spill, release, or exposure. The Occupational Safety and Health Administration, or OSHA, developed the bloodborne pathogen standard to protect workers from human bloodborne pathogen exposures. The bloodborne pathogen standard covers all occupational exposures to blood and other potentially infectious materials and serves to provide methods to protect workers from exposure. The regulatory citation is 29 CFR 1910.1030. Bloodborne pathogens are pathogenic microorganisms that are present in human blood and can cause disease in humans. These pathogens include, but are not limited to, human immunodeficiency virus, or HIV. HIV weakens a person's immune system by destroying important cells that fight disease and infection. No effective cure exists for HIV, but with proper medical care, HIV can be controlled. Hepatitis C virus, HCV. Most people become infected with the hepatitis C virus by sharing needles or other equipment to inject drugs. There is no vaccine for hepatitis C. Hepatitis B virus, HBV. Hepatitis B is a liver infection caused by the hepatitis B virus. Hepatitis B is transmitted when blood, semen, or other bodily fluid from a person infected with the hepatitis B virus enters the body of someone who is not infected. Bloodborne pathogens can be transmitted through contact with infected human blood and other potentially infectious body fluids. The most common ways for bloodborne pathogen transmission are through sexual contact, sharing of needles from mother to babies at or before birth, contact with broken skin from parenteral rashes, cuts, punctures, abrasions, acne, and sores, and contact with mucous membranes, eyes, nose, and mouth. Other potential infectious materials, or OPIM, include semen, vaginal secretions, cerebrospinal fluid, synovial fluid, pleural fluid, pericardial fluid, amniotic fluid, saliva and dental procedures, and other body fluid contaminated with blood. The following are not expected to be infectious unless visibly contaminated with blood: urine, sweat, feces, sputum, vomit, tears, and nasal secretions. If visibly contaminated with blood, it will be necessary to practice universal precautions. In the event of an exposure, first get immediate care using eye wash, shower, soap, or water, using the incident protocol. Next, get medical attention through urgent care or the emergency room. Next, for reporting, report the incident to your supervisor and complete the incident report. And last, the follow-up, request healthcare professionals' written opinion and comply with additional testing requirements. As part of OSHA's bloodborne pathogen standard, Wake Forest offers the hepatitis B vaccination series to any employee who is reasonably anticipated to have exposure to blood or other potentially infectious materials. The vaccine is provided at no cost to employees. The hepatitis B vaccination is a non-infectious vaccine prepared from recombinant yeast cultures rather than human blood or plasma. There is no risk of contamination from other bloodborne pathogens, nor is there any chance of developing HBV from the vaccine. To receive the vaccination, get supervisor approval and complete the HBV program form located on the EHS website. If you are offered the vaccination series and decline, you must complete the declination located on the Hep B vaccination program form. Control measures. One way to prevent exposure to bloodborne pathogens is through the practice of universal precautions. Universal precautions are an approach to infection control in which all human blood and certain human body fluids are treated as if known to be potentially infectious for HIV, HBV, or other bloodborne pathogens. Universal precautions involve the use of protective barriers such as gloves, gowns, aprons, masks, or protective eyewear, which can reduce the risk of exposure of the worker's skin or mucous membranes to potentially infectious materials. In addition, under universal precautions, it is recommended that all workers take precautions to prevent injuries caused by needles, scalpels, and other sharp instruments. Pregnant workers are not known to be at greater risk of contracting HIV infection than are workers who are not pregnant. However, if a worker develops HIV infection during pregnancy, the infant is at risk of infection. Because of this risk, pregnant healthcare workers should be especially familiar with and strictly adhere to precautions to minimize the risk of HIV transmission. The OSHA bloodborne pathogen standard requires universal precautions to be used when coming into contact with human blood, OPIM, and human body fluids that are visibly contaminated with blood. Keep in mind it is always a good practice to wear gloves when handling substances of human origin. Biological safety is the control of the exposure to prevent or minimize health effects to the employee. It is accomplished through engineering controls, administrative controls, personal protective equipment, and good work practices. Engineering controls. The equipment and devices that are used to minimize or eliminate employee exposure to bloodborne pathogens such as biosafety cabinets, sharps with safer devices, hand washing facilities, and labeled leak-proof biohazardous bags and containers. Work practices. Routine use of barriers such as gloves and goggles when anticipating contact with blood or body fluids. Remembering to wash hands and other skin surface immediately after contact with blood or body fluids. Careful handling and disposing of sharp instruments during and after use. Hand washing is like a do-it-yourself vaccine. It involves 5 simple and effective steps: wet, lather, scrub, rinse, and dry. You can take to reduce the spread of illness. Hand washing facilities must be readily available for employee use. Hands must be washed after removing gloves and after any exposure incident. Waterless hand sanitizer may be utilized if hand washing facilities are not available, but hands should be washed with soap and water as soon as feasible. When washing your hands, be sure to use warm water that is comfortable. Use liquid soap. Use friction by rubbing your hands together and rinse downward. And dry your hands thoroughly after washing. Administrative controls. Biohazard signs must be posted at the entrance of HIV and HBV research labs and labs doing other biohazard research. The sign must include special requirements to enter the area and the name and phone number of the lab director or responsible individual. Biohazard labels must be affixed to the container in a manner that prevents removal. Biohazard labels must be predominantly red or orange with a prominent biohazard symbol. Red bags or red containers can also be used in lieu of biohazard labels. Personal protective equipment. All employees should have access to PPE that is task appropriate and the correct size. The PPE may include but is not limited to gloves, gowns, lab coats, face shields, and goggles. Employee training on PPE should include the location, proper use, proper disposal, decontamination procedures for reusable equipment, and selection of proper PPE for the task. Eye protection is used when there is a potential for splashes, splatters of liquids. Examples are safety glasses, goggles, and face shields. Gloves are worn to protect hands and may be single-use or reusable. They include vinyl, latex, and nitrile. Protective clothing is worn to protect skin and clothing from hazards, such as lab coats or lab aprons. Respiratory protection is worn to prevent inhalation of airborne microorganisms, dusts, mists, and chemical fumes. Prior to wearing, employees must obtain medical clearance and training, and then fit test. This must occur annually. Body fluid spills. Custodial staff are tasked with cleanup of spills and unplanned releases of potentially biohazardous material. This would include, but is not limited to, blood, urine, feces, and vomit. Residence life and housing staff is not to clean up these spills. Procedures to follow in the event of a body fluid release. First, always avoid walking in the spill and cordon off the area of the spill to prevent foot traffic. Call your supervisor if assistance will be needed in the cleanup. Retrieve the bloodborne pathogen spill cleanup kit and clean and decontaminate the area as instructed. Always be sure to replace the used bloodborne pathogen spill kit with a new kit after cleanup. Use the provided biohazard spill cleanup kit only. Put on the gloves, goggles, mask, and Tyvek or coveralls with the booties to protect skin and clothing while cleaning the spill. Use absorbent provided in the spill kit and place on top of the spill. Allow to soak for the recommended period of time. Use a disposable scoop, pan, and brush to collect residues and place in the properly labeled container for disposal. Use a quaternary ammonium cleaner or 10% bleach solution to decontaminate the area and clean any unreusable equipment. And place decontamination residue and towels in the container with the spill cleanup residue. After the cleanup, remove PPE, gloves last, and place in container with the cleanup residue. Seal the container and bring to Student Health Services and place in the biohazard waste collection box for disposal. Lastly, wash your hands with warm water and soap. If a spill covers an area greater than 4 feet by 4 feet, an outside contractor will be called in for cleanup. In such a scenario, the University Operations Center, or UOC, will dispatch custodial staff to the spill. Upon arrival, custodial staff must remain until a supervisor or the EHS representative arrives. And be sure to prohibit foot traffic through the spill area. The supervisor or EHS representative will evaluate the spill and contact the professional vendor and remain at the scene until they arrive for cleanup. Potential crime scenes will be handled through the University Police Department, custodial supervisor, and the EHS department. Gray water, black water, and sewer water are all names for wastewater. Wastewater is any water that has been affected by human use. This includes sinks, toilets, showers, and washing machines. Wastewater may carry biological contaminants and therefore should be treated in the same manner as body fluid spills. Cordon off the area and prevent foot traffic. Call Facilities and Campus Services at 4255 and wait for their arrival. Fire and life safety. Always know an evacuation route when in a building. Pay attention to posted building evacuation routes. It is always a good idea to at least have 2 escape routes. Maintain a clear means of egress out of a building. Don't store anything in hallways and make sure not to block the exits. Fire doors are not to be propped open. Make sure there is 3 feet of open space on either side of mounted fire extinguishers. If you see smoke or fire in a building, pull the fire alarm and then evacuate. Call University Police at 5911 to report the fire, and only use a fire extinguisher if you are not in immediate danger. Again, if you choose to use a fire extinguisher, make sure your life is not in immediate danger. Be sure to keep your back to an exit so you can escape, and make sure you use the correct extinguisher for the fire. To use a fire extinguisher, remember the word pass, P-A-S-S. Pull the metal or plastic ring at the top of the extinguisher. Aim at the base of the fire. If you aim at the flames, the extinguishing agent will pass right through, so aim for the fuel. Squeeze the top handle or lever. This depresses a button that will release the pressurized extinguishing agent, and sweep from side to side until the fire is completely out. Start using the extinguisher from a safe distance and then move forward. Once the fire is out, keep an eye on it in case it reignites. Anytime there is a fire or medical emergency, always dial 5911 from a campus phone or 911 from a cell phone. In case of injuries, never leave the victim alone. Send another individual to meet medical responders and bring them to the location of the victim. Make the victim comfortable if possible, and only if it will not cause further injury. And when speaking with the dispatcher, always provide the building, floor, and room number if applicable. Many buildings on campus are equipped with AEDs. Locations will be designated with an appropriate sign. All injuries must be reported on a first report of injury form available on the HR website. Complete the form as soon as possible after an injury. Accidents and incidents, such as spills of chemicals, must also be reported. In the event of an incident or accident, complete the first report of incident form located on the EHS website. Molds are microscopic organisms found everywhere in the environment, indoors and out. When present in large quantities, molds have the potential to cause adverse health effects. Mold typically appears as colored, woolly mats, often with a foul, musty, or earthy smell. For individuals allergic to mold spores, symptoms are typically mild and include sneezing, runny nose, and eye irritation. Those at greatest risk of health effects include individuals with allergies, such as asthma, and those with weakened immune systems. The best way to prevent mold growth is to stop water intrusion within buildings at its source. Report all leaks, standing water, or other signs of potential water intrusion immediately. Asbestos is a mineral fiber found in rocks. There are several kinds of asbestos fibers, all of which are fire-resistant and not easily destroyed or degraded by natural processes. Asbestos has been used in a wide variety of household and building materials, such as pipe and boiler insulation, floor tile and mastic, wall and ceiling materials, such as decorative and acoustical plasters or tiles, and exterior siding and roofing materials. Asbestos has been shown to cause cancer of the lung and lining of the lung, as well as other non-cancerous lung diseases. Exposure can be prevented by maintaining materials in intact and sealed conditions. When asbestos must be disturbed, as in renovation or repairs, a combination of engineering controls and dust suppression methods can prevent exposure to building occupants and minimize exposure to abatement workers. Wake Forest hires licensed, qualified contractors to perform abatement work on campus. Wake Forest also has certified employees to oversee the work of the abatement contractor to ensure that all controls are adequately implemented. Crystalline silica is a natural constituent of the Earth's crust and is a basic component of sand and granite. Workers may be exposed to dangerous levels of silica dust when cutting, drilling, grinding, or otherwise disturbing materials that contain silica. These materials and tasks are common on construction jobs. Be aware of the operations and the job tasks that can create crystalline silica exposures and know the steps that should be taken to prevent exposures. Use vacuums, water, or different work practices to reduce or eliminate the dust. Wear an approved N95 dust mask as respiratory protection when other controls are not enough. And wear disposable or washable work clothes. Vacuum the dust from your clothes and change into clean clothing before leaving the work site. The Wake Alert website is the primary information source during an emergency at Wake Forest. Updates and information will appear on the Wake Alert website. Always be aware of potentially hazardous weather conditions. In the event of a severe thunderstorm or tornado, seek shelter indoors immediately. Go to the lowest floor of the building in the innermost room or corridor. Stay away from windows.